My name's Carl. I'm 29, and up until recently, I thought my family's constant little digs were just jokes. You know the type, the kind you laugh off to keep the peace, the comments you tell yourself aren't meant to hurt. But lately, it's been harder to convince myself of that. Every gathering has felt like sitting in the middle of a roast where I'm the only one who didn't sign up for it. I'm the oldest sibling, the one who made it out, as my relatives like to put it. I worked my way through college, built a decent career, saved enough to buy myself a nice car. Nothing outrageous, just something I'm proud of. I thought that was something to celebrate. Apparently, it just made me a target. My sister, Emily, is 24 and still living at home. She has a habit of turning every conversation into a competition, even if there's nothing to compete about. My parents, well, they mean well, I guess. But they have this way of siding with her no matter what, like I'm the responsible one who doesn't need backup. I can handle the teasing most days, but this past weekend, something in me snapped, not all at once, but like a hairline crack that's been there for years and finally gives under pressure. We were all sitting in the living room after dinner, a pile of wrapping paper and gifts around us. It was supposed to be a light-hearted moment, family laughing, sharing stories, the kind of thing you imagine in commercials. I was halfway through unwrapping a book my mom picked out for me when I heard her whisper to Emily. It wasn't exactly quiet, more like the kind of whisper someone uses when they want to be overheard. "He doesn't deserve that car after how he treats us," she said, like I wasn't 5 feet away. My hands froze on the paper. I glanced up, and sure enough, Emily was smirking like she'd just been handed the juiciest piece of gossip. Before I could say anything, Dad chuckled from his recliner and added, "If he won't lend it to us, maybe we should teach him a lesson and accidentally scratch it." He said it with this casual laugh, like it was a joke, but the look he shot me wasn't playful. It was a challenge. My heart thudded in my chest. They'd been asking to borrow my car for months, not for emergencies, just whenever they felt like it. I'd been saying no because the last time I let Emily borrow my old car, she returned it with a dent and acted like I was overreacting. I thought drawing a boundary was reasonable. Apparently, to them, it was a personal insult. I set the book down carefully and just sat there for a second, letting the words hang in the air. My sister was grinning outright now, clearly enjoying the fact that this was getting under my skin. I could feel my ears getting hot, but I forced a calm smile. "Actually," I said, pulling my keys from my pocket and letting them dangle from my finger, "about that car." The room went quiet. Mom's face shifted from smug to wary, like she wasn't sure where I was going with this. Dad leaned forward a little, and Emily stopped smirking just long enough to look confused. I didn't say anything else right away, just let the silence stretch while I leaned back on the couch. My heart was hammering, but there was a strange calm in knowing I finally had their full attention. For once, they weren't talking over me or dismissing what I said. They were waiting. That moment, those few seconds where their faces shifted from amusement to curiosity to unease. That's when I realized how tired I was. Tired of being treated like the family ATM. Tired of having every accomplishment brushed off, every boundary tested. Tired of pretending I didn't hear the whispers and the snide comments. Something inside me had finally clicked, and I knew I wasn't going to keep playing along. But I didn't give them the satisfaction of an answer just yet. I just let my keys drop into my palm and tucked them back into my pocket, forcing a grin that felt sharper than usual. "We'll talk about it later," I said lightly, and went back to unwrapping my book as if nothing happened. I could feel 3 pairs of eyes on me the rest of the night, and honestly, for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind making them wait. The next morning, I woke up with that weird post-family gathering fog. You know, the one where you replay everything in your head and wonder if you overreacted. I was making coffee when I got a text from Emily. "Hey, can I borrow your car for the weekend? I promised Sarah I'd drive her to the outlet mall." "No, good morning. No, thanks in advance. Just that." I actually laughed out loud, which startled my cat enough to make him jump off the counter. I stared at my phone, wondering if she sent that before or after last night's little, "maybe we should scratch it" comment. I texted back, "Hi, Emily. Bold move asking the guy you apparently want to teach a lesson." She replied with an eye roll emoji and, "Come on, it was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. You know Mom and Dad didn't mean it." I didn't answer right away. I just sipped my coffee and watched the steam curl. A year ago, I would have caved by now, handed over my keys just to avoid the fight. This time, I typed, "Sorry, I'm using it this weekend. Technically true. Using it to drive myself to get groceries counts, right? 5 minutes later, Mom called. I let it go to voicemail, but she called again. And again. Finally, I picked up. Carl, she said, skipping right over hello. Why are you being so difficult with your sister? She's just asking to borrow the car. It's not a big deal. I leaned against the counter. Not a big deal. Mom, you literally said last night I didn't deserve the car. There was a pause. Then she sighed like I was the unreasonable one. You know, we were just teasing. Your dad was joking about the scratching thing. Sure, I said. Because threatening to key my car is everyone's favorite party game. Carl, she said sharply, don't twist things. Emily needs your help. You don't have to hold grudges over one little comment. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep my voice even. Mom, I've let her borrow my cars before. She returned one with a dent and laughed about it. Remember? She was young. People make mistakes. She was 22. She apologized. No, she said. You can't even notice it unless the light hits it a certain way. That's not an apology. Mom made a frustrated sound. You always have to bring up the past. Why can't you just be supportive? Family helps family. There it was, the magic phrase that had been used as a guilt trip my entire life. I could practically hear Dad nodding in the background. Mom, I said, I am supportive. I literally fixed your leaky roof last winter. I helped pay off your hospital bill when Dad's insurance didn't cover it. I'm not unsupportive just because I won't be Uber for Emily every weekend. She went quiet for a beat, then changed tactics. Fine, I'll tell her she can't go, but she's going to be heartbroken. I hope you're happy. That one stung, but I stayed firm. I'll take my chances. She hung up without saying goodbye. I thought that was the end of it, but later that afternoon, I got a group text from Dad. Family dinner at 7. Don't be late. There was no please, no can you make it? Just a command. I stared at it, debating whether to skip, but curiosity got the better of me. If they were going to try another guilt trip, I wanted to be there to hear it in person. Dinner that night felt like walking into a courtroom where everyone had already decided the verdict. Emily was sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone with a dramatic pout. Mom was clattering dishes around louder than usual. Dad was in his usual seat, arms crossed. Carl, Mom said as soon as I sat down. Your sister had to cancel her plans because of you. I raised my eyebrows. Wow, that sounds serious. Should we hold a moment of silence for the outlet mall? Emily shot me a glare. You think you're so funny. It's not about the mall. It's about you being selfish. I grabbed a roll from the basket and started buttering it slowly, just to watch her squirm. You know what's selfish? Threatening to damage someone's property because they won't give you free access to it. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. That's enough, Carl. Your mother already told you we were joking. Then maybe don't joke about vandalizing my stuff. I shot back, my voice sharper than I meant. Mom jumped in, her voice soft but edged. Carl, we're worried about you. You've been so defensive lately. It feels like you don't even want to be part of this family anymore. That one hit me right in the chest. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. For a second, I just stared at them, my parents, who I'd bent over backward to help, and my sister, who still looked like she was waiting for me to cave. I finally said, I want to be part of this family. I just don't want to be the family doormat. The silence that followed was heavy. I could see Mom's lips pressed together, like she wanted to argue but didn't know what to say. Emily rolled her eyes and muttered, Drama queen. I leaned back in my chair and gave her a sweet smile. Thanks for the feedback, Emily. I'll put that in my diary right under most passive-aggressive family dinner ever. Even Dad cracked a reluctant snort at that, but he quickly masked it with a cough. Dinner went on in stiff silence after that. The only sounds the clinking of forks and Emily's occasional exaggerated sighs. By the time I left, I could feel the tension pressing on my shoulders like a weight. But under it, there was something else, something sharper. I wasn't just annoyed anymore. I was done. Done with being manipulated, done with pretending their comments didn't hurt, done with letting Emily act like my belongings were community property. On the drive home, I caught myself gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, replaying the look on their faces when I said I wasn't their doormat. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for saying it. If anything, I felt lighter. Still, I had this nagging sense that things were about to escalate, that my refusal to bend had just thrown down a gauntlet I couldn't take back. And I was right. Because the very next day, I got a call that took this whole situation from irritating family drama to something much bigger and much harder to ignore. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls and a text from a number I didn't recognize. The text said, "Hey, this is Mike from Midtown Auto. We're just confirming you wanted the work done today. Car's already in the bay. We'll get started soon." I stared at my phone, confused. I hadn't scheduled anything at Midtown Auto. In fact, I hadn't taken my car in for anything since its last oil change. I called the number back. "Yeah, we've got your Civic in here," the guy said casually. "The paperwork says to do the tire replacement, brake check, and detailing. Should be ready by the end of the day." My stomach sank. "Wait, what paperwork? Who dropped it off?" Young woman, dark hair, said she was your sister. Had your name on the work order." I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. "Don't touch the car. I didn't authorize anything. I'm on my way." By the time I got there, I was half expecting it to be a misunderstanding, like maybe she'd borrowed the car without asking, but hadn't actually done anything else. Nope. There it was, sitting in the bay with one of the tires already off. Emily was leaning against the wall scrolling on her phone, like she was waiting for her latte. "What's wrong with you, Emily?" I said, storming over. She barely glanced up. "Relax. Your tires were getting bald. I did you a favor." "A favor?" I repeated, incredulous. "You stole my car keys, drove it here without permission, and signed my name on a work order? That's not a favor. That's theft." She rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. Mom said it was fine." I actually laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Mom said it was fine? Emily, you don't live in a sitcom. You can't just take someone's car because Mom said so." Just then, Mom walked in. Of course she was here. "Carl, lower your voice," she said, glancing at the mechanic, who looked like he wished he could disappear. "Your sister was just trying to help." "Help?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You knew about this? You told her it was okay to take my car without asking." Mom frowned, like I was the unreasonable one. "You've been so stubborn lately, Carl. We thought if we just took care of it, you'd see we were right." I just stared at her. "You thought? Mom, this isn't about tires. This is about you ignoring my boundaries. You don't get to teach me a lesson by stealing my car." Emily muttered, "You should be thanking me. You've been too cheap to replace those tires for months." I turned to her slowly. "Cheap? I'm the one who paid to fix Mom's roof, remember? I'm the one who paid Dad's hospital bills. I just didn't want to shell out $500 for new tires at the exact second you decided it was urgent." Emily crossed her arms. "You're overreacting. It's not like we wrecked it." I took a step closer. "Not yet. But if I hadn't caught this, you would have made decisions about my property without my consent. Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" Mom put a hand on my arm like she was trying to calm me. "Carl, we're your family. We just want to make sure you're safe." "Safe?" I said, pulling away. "If you cared about my safety, you wouldn't be threatening to scratch my car one night and then stealing it the next." That one landed. I could see Mom flinch, just a little. I turned to the mechanic, who was hovering awkwardly nearby. "Put the tire back on. I'm taking the car home." He nodded quickly, clearly relieved someone was making a decision. Emily muttered something under her breath as we walked outside, and I spun around. "What was that?" She smirked. "Nothing. Just saying you're lucky Dad isn't here. He'd tell you to stop acting like a spoiled brat." I just stared at her, my hands clenched at my sides. I wanted to say something cutting, something that would make her stop smirking for once, but the words stuck in my throat. When I got home, Dad was waiting in the driveway. "You embarrassed your sister today," he said without preamble. "She stole my car." I shot back. "She was trying to help you," he said, as if repeating the party line would make it true. "By forging my signature?" He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. You've been selfish lately, Carl. You've forgotten where you came from." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know what else to do. "Forgotten where I came from? Dad, I'm the one who's been helping keep this family afloat for years. And this is the thanks I get." He shook his head. "We just want you to be part of the family again. The way you're acting, it's like you think you're better than us." That hit me like a punch. I stood there for a second, staring at him, feeling something inside me harden. "You know what, Dad?" I said quietly. "Maybe I am better. Not better than you as a person, but better than the way you all treat me. Better than being guilt-tripped and manipulated every time I say no." Better than letting my sister steal from me and getting lectured like I'm the bad guy. His face darkened. Watch your mouth. No, I said, my voice steady now. For once, you watch yours. And then I walked inside, leaving him standing there in the driveway. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at my car keys on the table. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a refuge. It felt like a fortress under siege. I kept thinking about Mom's voice, Dad's words, Emily's smug expression. Something had broken that day, something I couldn't glue back together. And as much as I wanted to believe things could go back to normal, I knew they wouldn't. Because they weren't done pushing. And the next time they crossed the line, I wasn't just going to push back. I was going to push back hard. The next few weeks felt like living in a pressure cooker. I didn't block my family, but I might as well have. Every text from them sat unread for hours before I forced myself to open it, and most went unanswered. I needed space, but space wasn't something they understood. Mom left 3 voicemails the first week, all with that tone that sounds concerned on the surface, but is really just layered with guilt. Carl, we haven't heard from you. Your sister is upset. This is tearing the family apart. Please call us back before it gets worse. I listened to those messages late at night, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. A year ago, they would have worked. I would have called back, apologized, and smoothed everything over just to stop feeling like the villain. But this time, something in me had shifted. I was tired of apologizing for having boundaries. Work became my escape. I threw myself into extra hours at the office, volunteered for projects no one else wanted, and stayed late just so I wouldn't have to drive past my parents' street and feel that pull of obligation. My coworkers started joking that I was gunning for Employee of the Month, and I just smiled and let them think that. Better they think I was ambitious than realize I was hiding from my own family. But even at work, it was hard to get away from the gnawing sense of betrayal. I kept replaying the look on Emily's face at the mechanic shop, that smug little half-smile like she'd won something. And Mom's calm, patronizing tone. We thought if we just took care of it, you'd see we were right. It hit me one night, around midnight, when I was sitting on my couch with the TV on mute and my cat curled up next to me. They weren't just dismissing my boundaries. They were actively teaching me that my no didn't matter, that my property wasn't really mine, that as long as they called it help, they could bulldoze right over me. The thought made my stomach twist. I stopped visiting altogether. Normally, I drop by every Sunday for dinner, a habit more than anything, but I skipped 2 in a row. Mom texted me after the second absence. You're hurting your father by staying away. Emily thinks you hate her. Is that what you want? I stared at it for a long time, thumbs hovering over the keyboard, before setting the phone down and walking away. I didn't have the energy to fight, and I knew anything I said would just become ammunition for the next argument. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt. That's the thing about family. Even when they're wrong, even when you know they're wrong, there's a part of you that still wonders if you're the problem. I'd lie awake at night replaying Dad's words. It's like you think you're better than us. The worst part was, I didn't want to be better. I just wanted to be treated like an equal. One Friday evening, I ran into one of Mom's friends at the grocery store. She smiled sympathetically and said, I heard about the fight. Your mom said you've been distant. I hope you can forgive them soon. Family is all we have. That was the moment I realized they were telling people, painting me as the cold, ungrateful son who abandoned his family over just a misunderstanding. I drove home gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my anger had burned into something quieter and colder. If they were going to spin this story, fine. But I wasn't going to sit there and keep letting them make me the villain. I started taking small steps to separate myself. I changed the garage code at my house, not because my parents ever came over unannounced, though they'd hinted at it before, but because I wanted the reassurance. I moved the car keys to a different spot, somewhere only I knew. I even called my insurance company and added an authorization note. No one but me was allowed to make changes to my account. It was strangely satisfying, like quietly reclaiming pieces of my life they'd taken for granted. But the hardest part was the loneliness. For all their faults, my family had always been my default weekend plan, my safety net, my sounding board. Cutting them out left an ache I didn't expect. I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to text Mom about something funny that happened at work, then stop halfway and remember, she'd probably just use it as an opening to guilt trip me. So I started talking to other people. I had a couple of friends I'd been distant with, always too busy, too wrapped up in family drama, and I made plans with them. Drinks after work, a pickup basketball game on Saturdays, even a short road trip with an old college buddy. And for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. One night, sitting at a bar with my friend James, I finally let some of the frustration spill out. "Man, that's rough," he said after I told him about the car incident. "But you know what? Good for you for drawing the line. Sounds like they've been taking advantage of you for a while." Hearing someone say it out loud was like flipping a switch. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This wasn't just family drama. It was a pattern. Still, the guilt crept back, and every time I saw a missed call from home. And every time, I had to fight the urge to answer. Then, one night, Mom left a different kind of voicemail. Her voice wasn't angry this time. It was sad. "Carl, we miss you. Your father says you're punishing us. Emily's been crying. Please come to dinner next week. Let's try to work this out." I listened to it twice. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe they'd really reflected on what happened and were ready to change. But another part of me, the part that still saw Emily's smirk and heard Dad's accusation, knew better. If I went back now, nothing would change. They'd just take it as proof that they could push me to the breaking point, and I'd still come crawling back. So I didn't reply. Instead, I started thinking about what it would look like to really hold my ground, not just by staying away, but by making sure they understood I was serious this time. I wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but the seed had been planted. And as much as it hurt to admit it, a small, stubborn part of me was looking forward to the day they'd realize I wasn't going to keep playing the role of the good son. Because when that day came, I wanted to be ready. If rock bottom was lonely and heavy, the weeks that followed felt like stepping into sunlight after being underground for too long. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't some big movie moment where I decided to change my life. It was smaller than that, slower. But little by little, I felt myself start to breathe again. For starters, work started going really well. That big project I'd volunteered for, it ended up catching the attention of my manager, who looped me in on a strategy meeting with higher-ups. For the first time, I wasn't just the guy executing tasks. I was part of the planning. I left that meeting with a sense of pride I hadn't felt in a while, and a week later, I got pulled aside by my boss. "You've been killing it lately, Carl," she said. "How would you feel about leading the next phase of the rollout?" I said yes so fast I think I startled her. Leading that project meant longer hours, sure, but it also meant a bigger paycheck. And with that came something I didn't realize I'd been craving: leverage. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. I upgraded my apartment, not to something flashy, just a bit bigger, with a private garage so I wouldn't have to worry about anyone snooping around my car again. I moved my savings into a high-yield account and started setting real financial goals. And, maybe most importantly, I started therapy. I'd always rolled my eyes at the idea, but one session in, I realized how much I'd been carrying. My therapist helped me put words to things I'd been feeling for years. How my parents' help came with strings. How I'd been conditioned to keep the peace at my own expense. How I confused avoiding conflict with being a good son. "Boundaries aren't punishments," she said one session. "They're instructions for how people can have a healthy relationship with you." That one line stuck with me. I started writing down every time I felt guilt-tripped, manipulated, or pressured. Seeing it in black and white made it harder to gaslight myself into thinking I was imagining things. And the more I saw it laid out, the more I realized how much I'd normalized. My friends noticed the difference, too. "Man, you seem lighter," James said one Friday night when we were grabbing drinks. "You used to be so tense all the time. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." "Therapy," I said with a grin, clinking my glass against his. "And also, not letting my family run my life like a group project." He laughed. "Good for you." But it wasn't just therapy and work. I started doing small things just for myself, stuff I'd put off because I felt guilty spending money or time on me. I bought a bike and started riding on weekends. I signed up for a cooking class and learned how to make something other than pasta and eggs. I even took a weekend trip out of state, just to see what it felt like to get in the car and go somewhere without telling anyone. The freedom was intoxicating. Meanwhile, my family kept trying to pull me back in. The texts didn't stop, but they started to sound less like guilt trips and more like fishing lines. "Emily got a promotion today. We're having cake if you want to stop by. Your dad's working on the shed. Could use an extra pair of hands. We haven't seen you in so long. Sunday dinner isn't the same without you." Each one was a test, and each time I said no, politely, but firmly. I felt my spine straighten a little more. Then one evening, I got a text from Emily herself. "Hey, I know things have been weird. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity won. I agreed to meet her for coffee. She showed up looking nervous, which was new. Usually she walked into any room like she owned it. "Look," she said, stirring her latte. "I know I crossed a line with the car. I thought I was helping, but I get why you're mad." It wasn't a full apology. There was still that but it was more than I'd expected. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. She hesitated, then added, "Mom and Dad don't get why you're so upset. They think you're overreacting. But maybe you're not. Maybe you just needed some space." That was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged that maybe I wasn't the crazy one. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. We didn't hug, but we left on better terms than we had in months. And for the first time, I didn't drive away feeling angry. I felt calm. But calm isn't the same as forgetting. That night, I sat down with a notebook and started writing out a plan. Not for revenge, not yet, but for what I wanted my future to look like. Where I wanted to live. How much I wanted to save. What kind of boundaries I was willing to hold, even if it meant more conflict. It felt good. Empowering, even. And maybe that's why, when the next storm hit, I didn't feel crushed the way I had before. Because I wasn't the same person anymore. I was stronger. And if they wanted a war, this time I wouldn't be fighting from my knees. A few weeks after that tentative coffee with Emily, I got the news that changed everything. My boss called me into her office and closed the door. Never a bad sign when she was smiling. "Carl," she said, "corporate has been really impressed with your work on the rollout. We want you to take on a leadership role permanently. There's a pay bump, of course, and," she paused for effect, "we'd like to sponsor you for the professional certification program you mentioned last quarter. It'll put you in line for a management position next year." I sat there blinking for a second, trying not to look like a kid on Christmas morning. The certification alone was worth thousands of dollars, and the new salary meant I'd finally have breathing room. I accepted on the spot. That night, sitting in my slightly bigger apartment with my slightly newer furniture, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. For so long, my family had made me feel like I owed them, that any success I had was partly theirs because they raised me. But now, I'd earned this, every last bit of it, on my own. I decided to celebrate with a little treat. Nothing too wild, just finally getting those new tires I'd been putting off, but on my terms this time. I went to a shop across town, paid cash, and drove home grinning like an idiot. When I parked in my garage, I stood there for a second just looking at the car, polished and safe behind a locked door, and felt a quiet surge of satisfaction. The next day, my parents called. "We need to talk about what's going to happen with Grandma's cabin," Mom said, skipping any preamble. I froze. The cabin was one of the few things in the family that had real sentimental value. A little place by the lake where we'd spent every summer as kids. My grandparents had owned it outright for decades. "What about it?" I asked cautiously. "Your uncle wants to sell his share," Dad said, his voice tight. "If he does, we'll lose the cabin. Unless one of us buys him out." I could already see where this was going. "We were thinking," Mom said gently, "you could buy it. You're in a good position now. You could even put it in your name. We'd just keep using it as a family, of course." I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You want me to spend my money to keep the cabin, put it under my name, but let everyone else use it like nothing's changed?" Mom hesitated. "Well, yes. It's about keeping it in the family." "Right," I said. "In the family. The same family that tried to teach me a lesson by stealing my car." There was a pause on the other end. "Carl," Dad said finally, "you can't hold that over us forever. This is bigger than you. It's about tradition." I almost laughed. "Tradition? Dad, you wanted to sell the cabin 2 years ago to pay off credit card debt. Now suddenly it's sacred." "We were under pressure then," Mom said quickly. "This is different." I said, letting the silence stretch. That night, I dug out the paperwork I had from Grandma's estate. I'd been the one who helped her update it before she passed. As I flipped through the pages, I realized something my parents probably didn't know. If I bought out my uncle's share, I wouldn't just own part of the cabin. I'd control the entire property outright, because my uncle and grandma had been the only owners left. That thought sat with me for a long time. I pictured every family gathering, every guilt trip, Every time they told me I was selfish or ungrateful. I pictured Emily smirking as my car sat on a lift at the mechanic's. And I pictured myself sitting on the porch of that cabin, coffee in hand, finally at peace. Not because they gave me permission, but because it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't just thinking about defending my boundaries. I was thinking about what it would look like to flip the script entirely. I called my uncle the next day. "Yeah, I'm serious," I told him. "I want to buy your share. Cash offer. I'll handle the paperwork." He was thrilled. Apparently no one else in the family had the money ready, and he'd been eager to offload it before the next tax cycle. While the paperwork was processing, I started playing my cards closer to the chest. When Mom asked if I was considering it, I just said, "Thinking about it," and left it at that. Meanwhile, I quietly got my financial ducks in a row. I spoke to a lawyer, not just about the cabin, but about setting clear terms for usage, liability, and access. The lawyer raised an eyebrow when I explained the situation but didn't comment, just drafted exactly what I asked for. A legal agreement that would give me full ownership and control, with no obligation to let anyone else use it. The day the paperwork came through, I sat in my car outside the law office with the deed in my hand. My name. No one else's. I knew I could just keep it quiet, let them find out whenever they noticed. But something about that didn't feel right. No, they needed to know. They needed to look me in the eye and realize I wasn't the family pushover anymore. I texted Mom. "I'll come to dinner Sunday. We need to talk." Her response came back almost instantly. "Wonderful. Emily will be so happy. Your dad will be glad to see you. We'll make your favorite." I sat there for a long moment, the keys cool in my palm, a slow smile spreading across my face. Because this time, I wasn't coming over as the apologetic son ready to smooth things over. I was coming over as the man who held all the cards. Sunday dinner felt different the second I walked through the door. It wasn't the house that had changed, it was me. I wasn't walking in as the son trying to keep the peace, or the brother who would eventually cave. I was walking in with leverage they didn't even know existed, and that gave me a quiet, dangerous sort of calm. Mom greeted me with an overly bright smile, like she was determined to pretend everything had been smoothed over. Emily peeked out from the kitchen, gave me a small nod, not quite warm, but not hostile either, and Dad stayed seated at the table, arms crossed, like he was preparing for a debate. Dinner started out almost pleasant. Mom kept the conversation on safe topics: weather, work, some local news story about a raccoon getting into someone's garage. I could feel the tension under the surface though, like everyone was waiting for me to finally apologize and put this whole thing to bed. When dessert was served, I put my fork down and said, "Actually, there's something I need to tell you." 3 sets of eyes turned to me at once. "I spoke to Uncle Rick," I said calmly. "I bought out his share of the cabin." There was a beat of silence. Mom's face lit up. "Oh, Carl, that's wonderful. I knew you'd come around." Dad grunted approvingly. "Smart move. That place should stay in the family." I let them bask in it for a second before I added, "Yeah, about that. It's mine now. Completely. Deeds already signed and recorded. Which means from now on, what happens with that cabin, who uses it, when, and how, is entirely up to me." The smiles froze. "What do you mean?" Mom said carefully. I said, still calm. "There won't be any more free-for-alls. No last-minute trips where Emily invites half her friends. No leaving it a mess for me to clean up later. If anyone wants to use the cabin, they'll need to ask me. In advance. And if I say no, that's the end of it." Emily's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. It's our family cabin." I turned to her, still perfectly calm. "No, Em. It was our family cabin. Now it's my property, and I get to decide who sets foot on it." Her face went red. "You're being ridiculous. You can't just keep us out." I smiled slightly. "I can actually. Legally." Dad's chair scraped back as he stood, his voice rising. "Carl, this is petty. You're punishing the whole family because you didn't get your way a few months ago." I met his glare evenly. "No. I'm setting boundaries you can't ignore this time." Mom tried to play peacemaker. "Carl, sweetheart, we're just asking to use it like we always have. Surely we can work something out." "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Here's how it'll work. I'll post a schedule for when I'm using the cabin. If you want to go up there, you'll request a weekend, and if I approve it, you'll agree in writing to follow the rules I've set. Clean up after yourselves, no unapproved guests, no damaging the property. And if anyone breaks those rules, no more cabin access, period." The room was dead silent. Emily was glaring at me like I'd just announced I was bulldozing the place. "This is insane," she said finally. I shrugged. "Or it's fair. For once." Dad shook his head. "You've changed, Carl." I smiled. Not cruelly, just quietly certain. "Yeah, I have. And that's a good thing." Then I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me and slid it across the table. Inside was a copy of the deed with my name on it, plus the agreement I'd had my lawyer draft. "You can read it over," I said. "If you want access, sign it. If not, that's fine too. But there's no more arguing about this. No more guilt trips. No more sneaking around my back to get what you want." Mom looked like she wanted to cry. Dad looked like he wanted to yell. Emily just sat there glaring, her arms crossed tight. I stood, picking up my jacket. "Take your time," I said lightly. "But just so we're clear, until those papers are signed, the cabin stays locked." And with that, I dropped my keys into my pocket, nodded once, and walked out, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. Driving home, I felt that same strange calm I'd felt when I first dangled my car keys weeks ago, but deeper this time. This wasn't just a bluff. I wasn't just holding my ground. This was me taking back control of the narrative. And judging by their faces, they'd finally realized I meant it. I didn't hear from them for 3 days. That was a record for my family. Normally, even a small argument generated a flurry of texts, missed calls, and passive-aggressive voicemails. This silence was different. It was heavy, deliberate. On the 4th day, I got a group text. "We've read your agreement. We'd like to talk in person." I agreed, but this time I insisted we meet at my apartment. That was a power move in itself. No home court advantage for them. No dining room table where they could surround me and make me feel like a defendant. When they arrived, I kept it businesslike. I offered water, not coffee. We sat in the living room instead of the kitchen. My cat jumped into my lap halfway through and stayed there, purring like some kind of furry bodyguard. Dad opened the folder first. "We've decided to sign," he said, his tone clipped. Emily groaned. "I still think this is ridiculous, but whatever." Mom sighed. "We just want things to go back to normal." I almost laughed at that. Normal is what got us here. We're not going back. We're starting over. They exchanged glances, but didn't argue. One by one, they signed the agreement. I could tell it killed Emily to put her name on something that spelled out rules she'd have to follow, but she did it anyway, scrawling her signature in angry loops. When the last pen stroke was down, I gathered the papers calmly, slid them back into the folder, and said, "Thank you. This will make things easier for everyone." That should have been the end of it, but Emily couldn't resist one last jab. "So what? You're just going to play gatekeeper now? Decide when we're allowed to go to the cabin like some dictator?" I smiled, not mocking but firm. "No, Emily. I'm going to make sure the cabin doesn't get treated like a free vacation rental where no one respects it. If you follow the rules, you'll get to use it. If you don't, you won't. Simple as that." She opened her mouth to argue, but Mom put a hand on her arm and shook her head. Dad stood up. "Well," he said gruffly, "guess we should go." I walked them to the door. Mom paused in the hallway and turned to me, her expression softer. "You've changed," she said quietly. "I had to," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." They left, and for a moment I just stood there in the quiet, the signed papers still warm in my hand. A week later, I made my first trip to the cabin as its sole owner. The place looked just as it had the last time I was there, but it felt different, lighter somehow. Mine. I spent the weekend cleaning, fixing a few things that had been neglected, and just breathing. On Sunday morning, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, looking out over the lake as the sun came up. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mom. "Beautiful day at the lake, huh? We'll see you next weekend, and we'll bring the food. Thank you for letting us use it." I smiled, not because of the gratitude, though that was new, but because of the respect behind it. They weren't assuming anymore. They were asking, and that was all I'd ever really wanted. As I set the phone down, I caught my reflection in the cabin window. The same face, but different somehow. Stronger. I took a slow sip of coffee, let the quiet settle around me, and whispered to no one in particular. "Not your doormat anymore." And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it.